Well, it is my honor to just briefly introduce Shirley Conrad. She reminds me every day of why it is that I came to Florida and came to FAU. When I first came to FAU, Marlene was in the process of retiring as the dean, and we needed to find some new faculty members to take over some of the students that she was working with. And she was actually the chair of Shirley's dissertation, and I became her chair. And it's been a gift from heaven to be able to work with Shirley. It just reminds me of what an honor it is to work with really great students. And Shirley and I got to know each other really well because we met every Thursday at 10:30 for about maybe 2 years. I don't know, but we worked a long time together as she was in the process of collecting her data, then saw her all the way to the end. And so she defended her dissertation just at the end of the spring semester. And I know that she's presented here at the Rogerian Conference before, and so this is accumulation now of her work. It's now complete, it's published, and we're going to be working on those articles. So you can read her bio in the guidebook. So Shirley, you can take it from here.
Thanks, Howard. That was awesome. All right, okay, everybody's good?
Yes.
All right, terrific. Well, greetings to everybody. My goal today is to share the tale of pan-dimensional research. I anticipate talking for about 40 to 45 minutes and then having an opportunity for questions. I would love to get rid of all these people on the side. Let me see if I can figure out how to do that. Okay, that works. Okay, so anyways, again, greetings. So the tale of pan-dimensional research the title is Nurse Coaching Empowers Knowing Participation and Change in the Process of Health Patterning. And I'd like to first just begin by setting the stage. In 1994, John Phillips wrote the chapter titled The Open-Ended Nature of the Science of Unitary Human Beings, where he said, the universe and the environment flow through the human field, and the human field flows through the environment field and the universe. He went on to say that this movement is mostly invisible, and he used an overhead projector to illustrate it when he was speaking about when he did this in his classroom. He further discussed the paradox of the universe appearing full empty. I imagine this slide where one might say that the fullness is difficult to appreciate. Yet in this picture, the emptiness could be seen as being difficult to appreciate. And this got me thinking, what could I identify related to fullness? As the photo of the universe indicates, we could never identify all the influential waves of energy, but I did want to call out three. They are my enrollment at Florida Atlantic University, the thought collective I was exposed to at the College of Nursing, and Martha Rogers and all the Rogerian scholars who came after her. These were certainly instrumental in informing a pan-dimensional insight. When I began this journey, I could never have imagined I would have the honor of speaking at the Society of Rogerian Scholars Conference. Get a little emotional. All those years of reading and admiring all of your work, and now to have the opportunity to share a few of my conceptualizations, well, it's a true honor. I'd like to extend my gratitude to the Martha E. Rogers Scholars Fund grant, which I was a recipient. And as you know, Howard Butcher was my chair. Marlene Smith was the initial chair, and then subsequently a committee member, which meant the world to me. Violet Malinsky was what a grand supporter in the background as I worked through this, and all scholars past and present. As the protagonist in this tale, I was challenged to make a distinction between holism and unitary, search for gaps and contribute to the art and science of nursing, ground my research in nursing, philosophical and theoretical perspective. I endeavored to do each of these in my research design. Now, I presented the nuts and bolts of this research study last year, and so I will not belabor them here, although I recognize you may not have been in attendance or have forgotten. However, I want to spend my time developing the areas that will be of particular interest to this group. So in regards to setup, I did study professional certified nurse coaches. I did this because after 10 years of national certification, they were not being represented accurately in the literature. And because of this, a study designed to address the gaps and to initiate a starting point for future research was developed. Now, the gaps in the literature included a broad awareness and understanding of the professional nurse coach role and availability of national certification is deficient. Variability in defining the coach and coaching is significant. Professional certified nurse coaches were almost absent in the literature. Research designs harmonizing with the art and science of nurse coaching are lacking. Studies grounded in the nursing theories are in the minority, and those with the caring theory were absent. Reporting actual doses infrequent, and individual experiences of coaching required additional illumination. So these gaps guided me to consider a traditional mixed methods approach. But what would be my perspective? There were no studies using the powers knowing participation in change theory. And so this was my ladder of abstraction. And Cowling and Swatart in 2011 conceptualized praxis with an emphasis on discovering connections between the philosophical, theoretical, and experimental world of practice, which Dottie just talked about as well. And this helped to inform the ladder abstraction that I developed. The unitary caring part will not be addressed today. So can nurse coaching be considered a patterning modality was an overarching question that served as the catalyst for this research. I wanted to know what role do these coaches have in potentially patterning the human energy field towards a higher wave frequency pattern of power as measured by the power tool and reflected in the narrative pattern profiles obtained from in-depth interviews. So I was trying to find that connection between power and nurse coaching. Now, obviously you begin your journey with some questions. I attempted to extract my thinking from the typical mixed method typology and elected to use numerical and textual data in place of qualitative and quantitative. And after deciding to use these terms, I read an article by Cowling where he used letters and numbers, which felt like a signpost that I was on the correct path. And so I had a numerical question based on the Power as Knowing Participation Change tool, a textual question regarding the perceptions, expressions after experiencing nurse coaching, and then of course a synthesis with the goal of apprehending pan-dimensional awareness of unity. So how should I tell the tale? Well, I chose an explanatory, convergent, parallel mixed methods using a single group with repeated measures and qualitative directed content analysis. This is a flow chart that indicates how this worked out. So again, a numerical data component was generated from the Power survey that was done pre and post of 22 nurse participants, and SPSS was used for the appreciation of that experience. The textual data component arose from a directed content interview guide where the 22 participants were interviewed after. One of those interviews was not captured, and appreciation of those experiences was used with Navivo. The black box is what I developed, which I will explicate later. Is instead of mixing, I developed a method that I want to explain, with the final step 4 being the goal of pan-dimensional awareness and unity of power as knowing, participation, and change. So every good story has a moment of despair. And so in this case, I actually had a different protocol that got kiboshed because of COVID. And then this is what we began to work on. And I just wanted to point out that I was working clinically during COVID, as were the nurses being recruited in the study. So there was despair in our human environment as we began this mutual process. The characters and setting. 33 professional nurse coaches were recruited. 18 of them were ultimately matched. Each coach was matched with a participant in their state of licensure. Nurse participants, 25 were actually recruited. 3 dropped out before they even began any of it. They just dropped out. They never started. They obviously, because of the tool, needed to speak, read, and write English, and they had to have a high school education, which of course their professional license indicated they had. Recruitment was remote and geographical varied across the United States, and sessions were conducted via phone or video conference, deciding however the pair decided. So now the scene is set. So I used independent t-test. So obviously the numerical question had two hypotheses. The first, I used an independent t-test. And my hypothesis was that there would be statistically significant difference in individual power profiles over time for the trial in each interrelated dimension. And for hypothesis B, I used an ANCOVA, which basically I was trying to indicate that the participants' years as a registered or licensed practical nurse would not alter those scores. And then for the textual component was the directed qualitative content analysis. My sample size calculations for the t-test was 16, and for the ANCOVA was 22. And as you saw, I did have 22 participants. The results of the sample t-test suggest that these coaches influence participants' power profiles. There was a statistically significant effect for the total and the 4 interrelated dimensions with a large effect size, except for the dimension of involvement, which had a medium effect size. The ANCOVA showed similarly statistically significant changes in the total in each subscale when controlling for years of experience. The effect sizes were large, except for involvement with a medium effect size. Regardless of years of experience of the nurse participants, nurse coaching appears to be beneficial. So the first question is answered, and that is that these coaches influence statistically significant changes to participants' perceived power after 4 hours of coaching with a large effect size, except for involvement, which was a medium effect size. And the years of experience of the nurse did not seem to matter. So this brings us to the midpoint where the textual data will provide the drama of the characters. My textual data included 194 one-sided single page space pages. We generated 58 generic codes, 12 subthemes, 6 essences or theoretical interpretations with 6 unitary concepts. So the interviews were conducted using rev.com and were transcribed verbatim using a theoretically informed interview guide. There was inductive coding. There was deductive coding using formative categorization matrix for the acausal worldview. There were iterative cycles of moving back and forth between the data and the theory, adding codes, deleting underrepresented codes, and separating codes of secondary analysis. Subthemes were theoretically languaged and defined, creating a coding matrix which served as a benchmark. Coding cycles were completed for each participant, between participants, and among all participants until no new codes were recognized. Units of analysis included everything within my pan-dimensional awareness. Listening versus reading transcripts, communicated much. I had intuitive insights, and the longer I dwelled, the more patterns and patterns within patterns I saw. So the directed qualitative content analysis is about finding in the transcripts the themes and coding categories. So next will be 6 slides that will all look similarly, but we'll kind of drill down into these essences. Each slide will have 2 subthemes. The first was manifestations of discouragement and the inability to envision the future. And that essence or theoretical interpretation ended up perceiving depleted energy field limits envisioning the future. The grounded quote that I'm using here is the place of powerlessness and feeling really caught up in the anxiety, frozen, not able to do anything about what I was feeling, about what was going on in my world. And the unitary concept reflected there are energy fields are open and distinct. Excuse me. Next, we had emerging perspicaciousness, and I'll go ahead and define this word, which implies unusual power to see through and understand what is puzzling or hidden. It's an acute mental vision of discernment. So that, along with the kaleidoscopic waves of energy, created the essence and titled Kaleidoscopic Experiences Nurture One's Perspicaciousness. The grounding quote is, but not really looking at it and saying, that's where I need to go. This is what I need to do. The unitary concept reflected is awareness of one's pandimensionality. Next, we had partnering with ease and ally in exploration. And these created the essence of shared life patterning is inspiring. And the grounding quote is, I'm guiding the session And that's like where the magic happens, because it's like trusting that the answers are within and not without. The unitary concept is integrality, facilitates seeking choices. Pardon me. Next, perceived expectations fade and recognizing discordant experiences. That essence became recognizing lower frequency experiences reveals limiting expectations. The quote, I feel small when I am hungry, have to pee or haven't had any water or I'm super tired. The unitary concept is recognizing pattern. Patterns powers freedom to act intentionally. Next, we have healing waves are propagated and aligning with what is most important. So changing wave frequency aligns choices with aspirations. So I think that it's helped me give myself a little more grace and give myself a little more permission to do things that my body needs. The unitary concept is involvement creates change. And then finally, we had sensations of flourishing, hypnotic reflections. That essence became vibrations of liberation. It's kind of like your brass and you have tarnished, and having the sessions has just taken that tarnish away and you feel bright and new and ready to go. That unitary concept is experiencing one's wholeness is powering. So the second question is answered. Essences of pattern profiles were perceived depleted energy field limits envisioning the future, kaleidoscopic experiences nurtured one's perspicaciousness, shared life patterning is inspiring, recognizing lower frequency experiences reveals limiting expectations, changing wave frequency aligns choices with aspirations, and vibrations of liberation. So the goal, obviously, as I've pointed out, is achieving a pan-dimensional awareness of unity. And so the problem became, how will I synthesize or mix the numeric and the textual data within a philosophical and theoretical perspective chosen? And conceptualization of mixed methods designed from a unitary perspective requires different language and thought processes. So the question becomes how to conceptualize this. So unitary phenomenon or unitarology requires the researcher to do several things. One is to be alert to pan-dimensional experiences. Two, acknowledge their participation in evolution and a mutual process. And three, recognize that they are unable to separate from the inquiry at hand. And so this is what I came to visualize as I was in this mutual process called pan-dimensional research. It kept feeling like a mess. Constantly organizing, followed by things being blown around, followed by more organizing. So this idea of a tornado came to mind. And if you look at this image, it's a dynamic image is exhibited in this figure. If you can imagine yourself in a fluid form, such as air. In some places, you're being shot up, pushed down, tossed horizontally, or placed in a spin cycle. It's a messy, exhilarating, and it's hard work. I pictured cleaning up after a tornado when I was trying to conceptualize what I had in front of me. You have seen the pictures of household items strewn about, perhaps a car stuck in a tree or a post driven through a wall. Oftentimes after weekly meetings, this is how I felt. So reflecting on that image from the perspective of being fluid or air in a tornado, is there any question that the researcher needs to consider these 3 points? Focusing on number 3, as a nurse working clinically during COVID-19, as were the nurses in this study, there is no way I could have bracketed my experience. The researcher is integral and cannot be isolated. This specific set of circumstances uniquely highlights this. Additionally, the unitary phenomena requires a recognition that open systems demand an iterative process, which I've described as moving towards organization, followed by everything strewn about, and then again followed by more organization. What phrase might describe this? Well, I thought dynamic process. How would I conceptualize this? So the phrase dynamic process is intentionally created with different fonts, space, sizes, and boldness to depict the process as dynamic rather than static. Iterative waves of information are drawn up from all directions and experienced. I'm going to lay out a model going back to how John Phillips did imagining a overhead. I'm going to just overlay layers. So fundamentally, the first layer is the following. The qualitative content analysis uses subjective interpretation via systemic classification. Directed occurs when using existing theoretical perspective, which I was doing. Thus, this process is theoretically informed, and so pan-dimensional awareness grounds the entire approach. Classifications of themes oscillate between inductive and deductive coding, which depicts acceptable movement between data and theory. So you can see the pan-dimensional awareness is in the middle, and then the things I've just mentioned around the outside. The second layer depicts items of debris that are available to enter the low pressure of the cyclone to be available for sense making. In this case, just a few that I'm picturing here is I mentioned listening to interviews was much more informative to me than just reading, because I could hear the tones and remember the experiences and the feelings I had during the interview. I consistently transitioned between micro and macro, micro and macro. I read and reread the literature, and often when you reread something, you're almost a different person, so you can interpret things differently and you have more insights. I was looking at patterns within patterns. I was utilizing interpretive theorizing, and I was talking with colleagues. The third layer begins to think about the pan-dimensionality. And in the top left, pan-dimensionality applies all ways of knowing. And I'm trying to depict this with the open door image. Ways of knowing extend outside of the five senses and can be illustrated with metaphors like a light bulb moment for the brain, gut feeling for the stomach, speaking from the heart. Intuition is depicted by the battery voltage. The mutual process is the image of three people, and the changing perspective by the glasses. It's messy and iterative as waves of information are drawn up from all directions and experienced. Emphasis is on experiencing over mere awareness so that there is a felt sense that is greater than knowledge alone. The researcher must endeavor to be alert, open, and engage experiential with the theoretical perspective over having mere knowledge of the theory. Finally, the fourth layer was experienced as a dynamic process, so the cyclones were added, so one could imagine the chaos of this nonlinear process. Again, the dynamic process was intentionally depicted as shown to illustrate the chaos and variability. So this is my conceptualization of the process needed for apprehending pan-dimensional awareness of unity, and draws upon the limitless information available through experiences with the human environmental field. But next, I needed to conceptualize the synthesis of data. For this, I thought of the iterative impact of waves on the shoreline. The frequency and force of the waves are continuous and gradually alter the shoreline. The discoveries are different at high tide than at low tide. This reminds me of a documentary named My Octopus the Teacher. Over time, the diver came to know more and more about the octopus, despite meeting him generally around the same area each time. What I'm trying to express is that ideas and perspectives grew in complexity as I remained open in the field, just as the diver and the octopus did. I also recently heard the actor John Malkovich explain this perfectly. He said, "I always say theater is like surfing, because you kind of paddle out on your little board, you turn your back to the sun, and you wait for a wave. You're not the wave," which I think most people think they are, but you really are not the wave. Malkovich emphasizes, the wave is created by the collision between the material and the public. You ride the wave or you don't. When he says the collision between material and the public, couldn't he just as easily be saying mutual process between human environmental field? I, as the researcher, just like the actor, could take the wave or not, but I am clearly not the wave. Phillips quotes Bohm and Pete, who stated, "Knowledge of reality does not therefore lie in the subject nor in the object, but in the dynamic flow between them." My octopus the teacher, Malkovich, and Bohm and Pete are talking science and unitary human beings, and we're in the field that influenced my conceptualization. Pan-dimensional awareness must be apprehended during the method of mutual rhythmic frequency process of analysis synthesis. This requires a rhythm that fluctuates between analysis and synthesis of the numerical, textual, and pan-dimensional awareness of unity. Again, Phillips in 2016 describes this in a way that moves away from understanding analysis synthesis as opposites, but rather a process of mutual rhythmic frequency, then again highlights the dynamism required. He similarly did this with the ideas of objective and subjective, visualizing them as unitive rather than opposing. These thoughts were instrumental to this conceptualization. The conceptualization I came to include these two integral processes, the process of pan-dimensional awareness of unity and the mutual rhythmic frequency process of analysis synthesis of the human environmental field wave frequency. The researcher is seeking the perception of full force of pattern when they transition from apprehension to appreciation. Recall I previously stated that I placed an emphasis on experience over mere awareness, so that there was a felt sense that is greater than knowledge alone. Also, the researcher must endeavor to be alert, open, and engage experientially with the theoretical perspective over having mere knowledge of the theory. Without doing so, one cannot achieve an appreciation for the full force of pattern waiting to be admired. Appreciation is like catching the wave versus observing the wave. A weather report might list the wave height, but the surfer is going to describe a wave in terms of barrel, closeout, crumble, clean, lip, shoulder, peak, set, swell, and drop. Which description reflects appreciation? So here it is. The union of the process of apprehending pan-dimensional awareness of unity and the mutual rhythmic frequency process of analysis synthesis becomes the unitive concept of unitary sense-making for numeric and textual data, and is a way of synthesizing pan-dimensional information in alignment with unitary transformative approach to research. Phillips, again in 94, described unitive as uniting of two or more things into something that is then made one, thus transcending the subjective objective limitations and rather looking at the human environmental field from which all manifestations emerge. He further states, since unitive is pan-dimensional, it transcends subjective objective to experience the whole, which gives rise to more meaningful pattern than the subjective or objective, which is what this method attempts to capture. Examples of pan-dimensional awareness using joint displays. First, we look at this. The gray bars are the pre-scores for the powers knowing participation and change tool, and the yellow show the post. If we start at awareness, the unitary concept was awareness of one's pan-dimensionality, and the quote I'm using here is, I think that my awareness has grown just in the fact, again, just being able to sit with a feeling and not have to put a name on it. It is just let the feeling grow and let those thoughts develop. Next was integrality facilitates seeking choices. And the quote is, being able to have someone to talk to about that, but basically in a way that didn't make me feel so lost. Like I was able to say, okay, well, what can I do about the situation right now? Is there anything that I can find, areas to grow where I am at the moment? Next was freedom. The unitary concept was recognizing patterns, powers freedom to act intentionally. And the quote, my choosing to try to work through it or choosing to not let it go was just giving the situation more power, and I needed to take it back. Next, involvement. With the concept, involvement creates change. The quote, I feel like for me, the difference between passively making decisions about life versus really actively trying to do something for myself. And then ultimately, the total, experiencing one's wholeness is powering. Pretty much just taking the reins and making the change that I needed, that I wanted, or that I needed. And so the joint display is able to show you simultaneously the textual and the data, and the numerical data side by side. While conducting the interviews and doing the analysis, this picture just kept going on and on in my head. And so if you look at the left, you'll see the numbers in black. Those are numbers for power scores. And as I interviewed these individuals, I just kept picturing them on Mount Despair. And so I gave a red dot to each participant And you can see that they're, pretty strung out, with the lowest one just being over 170. And as they experience this green line here of pattern manifestation, knowing and appreciation and voluntary mutual patterning, they experience the following. Experiencing depleted energy fields limits envisioning the future, but kaleidoscopic experiences nurtures one's perspicaciousness, and shared life patterning is inspiring, as is recognizing lower frequency experiences that reveals linking, limiting expectations, encouraging changing wave frequencies that aligns choices with aspirations, resulting in vibrations of liberation. And so the post test scores are here in yellow, and I envision them being on Mount Hope. Notice how the participants are all further up the mountain, at least at the halfway point. They're much more consolidated and not strung across. And I thought that was incredible. So in my mind, nurse coaching is in fact powering. In the dissertation, I continue to do multiple ways, as I hope you're seeing, of me trying to express the mutual patterning process here. And so for each of the individuals, I created a chart. And just to orient you, you've got the unitary concepts up here and the essences here. And we're kind of just accepting the fact that they're on that, Mount Despair, and we're plopping in here. So a linear presentation of a nonlinear movement from lower perceived power to a high perceived power. It's impossible to do it any other way than linear on 2 dimensions here. I just wanted to point out, so this participant 19, there's a quote here. So sometimes it can be hard to narrow down like what I really want, because a lot of things would be good. Nope, this is what I really want. And so like directional power is just so much more meaningful. I feel more free now because I've made these big changes, and I feel like I set myself up to have freedom that I had before been desiring beforehand. So it just kind of shows this movement of this one participant through her 4 hours and what this meant to her. At the bottom, you can see this particular participant's pre and post power scores. She goes up in every area, and her total score went from 280 to 311. Next, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes and just listen. I'd love for you to consider catching the wave of the mutual process of this one individual. Her name is Sarah, which is a pseudonym. I will give you scores periodically throughout. So just try to connect with this nurse. Sarah is a registered nurse with 5 years of experience. She describes her unit as primary COVID unit during the first wave of the pandemic. Since then, it has been converted to a general and moderate care unit to accommodate the need for more ICU beds, and is the target unit for COVID patients in her hospital. She enters the study for reasons of personal growth and to gain clarity. Her pre-power score is 236. Her initial pattern expression is described as feeling very lost during a really difficult year and feeling more down and isolated. The toll is like anything I've experienced in my 5 years of nursing. This caused her to question what she wanted to do with her career. The coaching partnership was new to her. She described it as different because it's not like a therapist relationship. Sarah found she was able to have open dialogue with someone who is not somebody who's trying to fix your problems necessarily. It was a unique experience for her, and she thought her coach was amazing. Greater clarity was achieved when her awareness grew from 61 to 65 around her work environment. She came to appreciate she had become isolated and distant from her coworkers. Additionally, she realized her perceived lower frequency wave pattern was not due to her workplace. Everyone was tired and burnt out, she thought. I just need to lean on some of my coworkers. But there was a problem. She self-identified as an ice princess. Sarah chose, and that score is 47 to 72, began reaching out to people a little bit more and initiating conversation with people. Her frequency wave pattern continued to move higher as she actively sought out things that made her feel well or good. Nursing students were finally allowed back into the hospital. Sarah loves teaching and had always asked for students in the past. The request was made, and now she had students with her every Friday. This, along with the positive reaction she was receiving from work she had exerted on her approachability, paid off. She states her greatest gain from the experience was realizing how much benefit I have from having an emotional exchange with other people. There were no descriptions of barriers that limited her freedom, although her score was 62-72, to act intentionally, and her involvement in creating change was robust, 66-72. Her post-power score was 267. Sarah was able to actively seek out choices versus passively making decisions. She is still in the same spot, but she states, I feel emotionally more comfortable and credits having somebody to work through those questions with was really helpful. And she felt very heard and very connected. So I created a narrative for each participant, and this was just one example. So remaining with the theme of telling a tale, we need to consider the idea of redemption. And redemption is a character produces a winning plan, which I'm hoping you're seeing. They feel invigorated enough to resolve conflict. They no longer feel hopeless, and they're pushing forward. These were things that I saw. I'm just going to show you 4 more examples of this. So again, remember the initial is perceiving depleted energy fields, and the end is the vibrations of liberation. So this individual said, I personally felt very lost, down, and isolated. But when coaching was over, she states, I learned that I need that sense of connection from people way more than I thought I did, having an emotional exchange with other people. Another example, if you set your goals at 7 and do 5, you feel like you failed. I would have set myself up for failure had I said 7 days a week. I felt that once I got that under my belt, okay, let's add something else. A third, I tend to make choices based on others' needs and not really reflecting myself or even my husband, in fact. It really has put me at a sense of peace and kind of realigns a lot of my energy to making sure that I'm not taking on too much and really making time to take care of myself. And finally, this participant, I think at work, whenever I become overwhelmed, I just kind of was more like restless. The choices I was making, I just felt like were kind of worthless at the time. Like feel like anything that I was doing at the time didn't really mean anything. I felt more like kind of passive, and you know what I mean? Like really didn't think too much about how my choices affected anything. I just kind of was there and doing what I was supposed to do. And by the end, this participant says, I'm just kind of growing. And so, epilogue. Professional nurse coaching, I believe, should be considered a patterning modality, and a method for mixed methods within unitary transformative paradigm is suggested. But always, the end only means what's next. I love this cartoon. Funny when there's always seems to be a few bits left over, as is the case in research. One of the things that I was intrigued by and actually a little bit disturbed by was that most participants were uncomfortable with the concept of personal power or power is freedom. They would use empowerment. They would switch it around over and over again. It was amazing to me. They are not comfortable with the idea of power, which I think says a lot about their work environment, perhaps the world environment as well. And then finally, of course, I'd like to thank if Dr. Barrett were here, but I'm sure she's listening, with developing her acausal worldview of power is freedom. And then this quote by a spoken word poet, Mr. Andrews, all inspiration really is a peephole into possibility. There is a wall and then suddenly something shakes it, disrupts it, and there's a crack that appears. And you can see something on the other side. And there is power to simply being able to say, I see it. And this spoke to me because I believe these participants, had the opportunity to create that crack and to see this power, even if they originally or initially couldn't conceive that, and to see it. I think it did a lot for them. And so these are my references. And then we'll have time for questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shirley. Speechless. I remember your dissertation defense very well, and you keep making quantum leaps. I love the way you layered this within this narrative of a play. It's just awesome.
Thank you.
So yeah. So comments, questions.
Shirley, could you stop sharing?
I'm trying desperately. Okay. There I go. I couldn't get the, okay. Where's the stop?
I've done it now. It's okay.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay, so I can get rid of this. Okay, thank you for that.
I don't know how
It's
to
good
raise
seeing
my,
you.
You too.
I don't know how, I
Okay,
can't.
hi, Rory.
Hi, Shirley. I'm sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand. I'm
It's
looking at
okay, I
my,
saw your actual one.
okay, good, good. First of all, an absolutely gorgeous presentation, Shirley. Really
Thank you.
creative and so interesting and well done. But I was wondering if you could describe, because I'm ignorant when it comes to coaching in terms of how it's different from psychotherapy and counseling. So could you describe a little bit about what goes on in a coaching situation?
Yeah, sure. Basically, it's about exploring, letting an individual explore, and they're directing like, so when you're a coach, you're not sitting here with any preconceived notion about what you're going to do, what you should do, what this person should do. You're really just facilitating the individual exploring their options and deciding which is best and how they want to go about doing it. Usually you set up little, you might call homework, so they come back to be able to update. It's also an accountability partner. So, I mean, I'm not a psychotherapist or anything. I know that you have background in mental health, but it wouldn't be any kind of psychotherapy. It's really about just helping the individual explore and deciding how they want to proceed and handling whatever the situation is.
I've got my hand up.
I see you now. Hi, Violet.
Hi. Okay. Two things. First of all, I guess it's more of an observation, but I really wonder, I'm struck by the fact that your participants were so uncomfortable with this idea of power and living their power. Empowerment, M means to put in. So it's like they need that person as a crutch almost in that moment. But I wonder if you were to go back to them now after some time has passed, if they would have really integrated it more and have become more comfortable with the idea that they have power and they are living it. My question, I've already posed this to you in our discussions along the way. I believe, and this may turn off a lot of people, but I really believe that we do not need nurse coaching because we have Barrett's practice method. And I don't see the difference between nurse coaching and Barrett's practice method. So I would say, why not just use Elizabeth's practice method?
Yes, and as you say, you and I have talked about this. And when I first came upon, I probably knew Barrett's theory before the nurse coaching. And there's many times where I've said the same thing. Well, this is coaching, right? So I don't disagree with you. However, sometimes the cart gets before the horse kind of thing. And I think that out at the end of the wash, when all that comes out, I would agree with you. But when I first went into this, that wasn't the driving force. The driving force was, could nurse coaching be considering a patterning modality? That was the catalyst that got me going. And then nurse coaching just so ill reviewed in the literature, it's horrific. But then yes, at the end of the wash, I totally agree with you in that respect. But here's the other thing. How do you get through that? Because I don't know what your experience is, but nursing theory isn't seem to be on nurses that I work with, coming out of their mouth on their tongues just like that. So sometimes I think you need a vehicle. And maybe in this case, the vehicle is this thing called nurse coaching that then could be tied into this theory a little bit more. Because I don't know if that makes sense, but it's a little messy, and I don't disagree with your observation.
Yeah, we've talked about nurse coaching as, well, use the metaphor of vehicle, but like Barrett's power theory is like a way of doing nurse coaching. It's the conceptual framework for nurse coaching. And I think that you concluded that in your dissertation. So
Basically.
yeah, so that's the theoretical framework for the process of nurse coaching, which is a certified, it's a role.
Right. And it would be great to see studies conducted using different theoretical perspectives, right? And is it any different than using different theoretical perspectives for nursing in general, your nursing practice in general?
But I think in terms of what Violet just said, nurses having done mental health consultation in a general hospital, nurses often get really stuck when they're really, really stressed. And to have somebody help them through that stress, no matter what your model is, can be incredibly helpful, because when people get stressed, they get very isolated. So they may even know Barrett's theory of power, but to be able to use it sometimes if you're really stuck is difficult when you're doing it on your own.
Yeah, when you're in a stressful situation or stuck or in a situation like COVID, you don't have the wherewithal to, you need somebody with you to walk that with you, whatever you want to call that, whatever role. But as you saw, people did identify the role as being different than their family physician, a therapist, which they had experience with. And a couple of them said, this is just so cool because they're not trying to fix me and I get to, figure this out. And some nurses would make a comment, and it could be participants. It just happened to be nurses. It could be anybody, any human being. They weren't sure what to do because when they come to a situation, they're so used to, someone else driving the car, so to speak. And they were like, I don't know, what am I supposed to do here? So it took them a visit or so to realize that they had the power to direct what was about to happen.
Shirley, you have 3 people with their hands up.
I
4.
can't see them. So would
Okay.
you help?
Marlene, Dorothy Larkin, Mary Hines, and
Okay.
Dottie Jones.
All right. Well, I guess Marlene, you said first. Let's go there.
Unmute. Yeah, of course we've had these conversations too, Shirley, and I really see I've gone through a nurse coaching program, so I have brought this up to the faculty that were teaching the program as well. Barbie Dossie was, and Susan Luck taught my particular coaching program. However, I think, as Howard or others said, this is a role. Nurse coaching is a role, just like you might have a role of a nurse practitioner, a clinical nurse specialist, as Rory said, a psych mental health nurse, nurse practitioner, or clinician or whatever. But I think it's the theory guided piece. I don't necessarily use Barrett. So I don't think it's just Barrett. I've used unitary caring. I've used Newman's theory as well. And it's a role where you can truly manifest nursing theory guided practice. And it's what, to me, that's the beauty of it, because you can ask for nurse coaching, and that nurse coaching is grounded in nursing theory. And so it's like the manifestation of theory guided practice to me. And while Barrett's theory is a wonderful one to use as a theory to guide their practice, I think there are others as well.
Thank you for making those points. You're absolutely right. Thank you. Dorothy.
Yes, I think all that's right. And but the way that I do think of coaching, as I do think of it as power, as knowing, participation, and change. That's the way I practice it. And my question is, did you explain about the theory of power as knowing, participation to the participants? Because
no.
Okay.
But in the interview, there was some questions related to power, etc. And then many times after everything was done, we might have a further discussion.
Yeah, that would be interesting to have a follow-up of teaching them about the theory and then examine again their scores. I know with the patients I work with, I talk with them about the theory, and it's woven into the practice, and they love it. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Mary?
Well, I wanted to say thank you so much, Shirley, because I've watched you grow, and I just really appreciated this presentation. One of the things that I would say, we get so much involved in nurse coaches as a role, but I think the big part that nurse coaches play, and there's a dynamic that you described here, is the ebb and flow between the person being coached and the person coaching. And sometimes I really think that we get so involved in our roles as nurses that we don't see the other side, and that's the patient and the change. And talking with Barrett in many years, she has really impacted my practice as a nurse practitioner, because I really understand now it's the power not only of the practitioner, but the power of the patient. And many times I think that patients are coming, and we can, as nurses, deal in this dynamic of power quite a bit. But you described three kind of really, I think, contextual or metaphorical ways of describing your process too. You were in a tornado, which I understand very well, in Colorado. There's also a hurricane that happens to you in Florida, and there are cyclones. And so when you look at all of that, I think that's where the patient comes from, just as the nurse coach does. And so I think you have wonderful things, metaphors in there. And I go back to Beck's work that she just published not long ago in the Journal of Holistic Nursing, in which she says we have to pay very close attention to the metaphors that come out, because they can inform Rogerian science just as much as anything else can. And you have beautiful metaphors there. So thank you so much for this beautiful work and for giving greater voice to nurse coaches.
Thank you, Mary.
Dottie
Am I
Smith, I think, was next.
Okay, go ahead.
Dottie Jones, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Thank you so much. I appreciated your insights as you went through the process and what unfolding went on. And one thing that concerns me is the idea that nurse coaches have to be certified. And using the label coach, does that demand a separation? And in a lot of the discussions that I've been in, and you know, the certification of the nurse coach limits the engagement of nurses coaching, so you can't even use the word. I just raised that as an issue of concern in terms of the use. I do agree that with Marlene, that I think nurses engage in an active process of what you call coaching through you know, their engagement with patients in Rogerian science. So I was intrigued by two things. One, the fear of power. And I think the idea of the knowing participation, maybe the knowledge also requires an understanding of power from a different perspective. So that to me was one thing I was thinking. But then this unfolding piece is also frightening. And I think sometimes what you're talking about, the engagement between the nurse and the coach, powerful. Nurse and the patient is a powerful engagement. Coaching may facilitate that. It builds trust, etc. Not that other things can't, but I think that the fear sometimes that people bring to that is surprising, because the trust is somewhat natural that the patient brings to the encounter. You would think they would, you know, exhibit that. So it's an interesting thing to explore, why the fear of power, what it means to them. And I would agree, maybe, you know, the knowledge that you share with them about power would be useful to see what the difference makes. I do think the idea that you raised several times, when the uncovering, the discovery is important also to kind of capitalize on, because it's a vehicle for doing that as well. So thanks for raising a lot of new ideas, new questions. I do think, though, I would urge caution in the language, because I think sometimes it could be problematic, although I know there are a lot of nurse coaches doing great things. Thank you.
So, thank you for those comments. Let me just address a couple of them, okay? When you look in the literature, there are people, nurses called a coach, that are not coaches in any way, shape, or form. and conducting what is called coaching that again doesn't reflect coaching in any way or form. And
Yeah.
therefore, that's why I wanted to use certified nurse coaches, which meant they all had a common practice grounding so that you would know that that could be reproducible.
Yeah.
There was another point you made. I've lost it now. I'm so sorry. But that was important. It was very important for this research, based on the review of the literature, that they be certified, because
Yeah. no, I
there's
can
only
see that.
one study out there using certified nurse coaches. Navigators are called coaches. People who get thrown a book to follow are called coaches. And we can't say anything about how coaching is impacting clients or people based on those models.
Mhm. Thank you.
Mhm.
Oh, I know we've been talking a lot about coaching, but I don't want to lose sight of the I'm a methodological nerd, and I don't want to lose sight on the innovation here that Shirley has given us all this gift of how to integrate textual and numerical data within a unitary perspective. And this really is a methodological innovation of how to do mixed methods, I believe, on how to do what we call traditionally mixed methods within a unitary science perspective. And the way she integrated the numerical data from the power tool with the textual data from the narratives, I think is something that I've not seen before in this way. And then also showing how in your tables, connecting the themes to change over time in the study is also something that I've not seen before. And I also want to congratulate you on how you integrated Roger's theory all the way through your interpretive process to come up with the themes, to come up with the joint display or the unitary, I just don't think we should lose sight of that. I think talking about coaching is really great. It's really important, but there's a methodological innovation here that is pushing the science forward in a new way. And I just don't want people to lose sight of that.
Thank you for that, Howard. Because I mean, as you've seen, you saw the defense, and this is not the defense. And I wanted to make sure that I geared the presentation to this specific group. So thank you for bringing that up. I think Megan has her hand up.
Quickly, Megan, because it is time for Richard now.
Okay, quickly. Congratulations, Dr. Conrad. You can hear me. Particularly because you conducted this research during an extraordinary time in nursing. And I'd be interested, the challenges of COVID, and to introduce this measure of support to the nurses is just beautiful. And I loved the image and the metaphor of the tornado as an image to guide all research.
Yeah.
It's profound. You could just write a whole article about using that image as research method. So, and one last comment about this debate about coaching. I participated in the program in the coaching, and I always resisted it too for the reasons, Dottie, that you brought up, and that we're saying this is nothing new to nursing. But I think as an organization, as it's put out there as a professional role, it begins to shift the paradigm towards not doing and more being, and empowering and evoking, which is very, very different from standard nursing. So those are my comments, and I thank you for your work. So
thank you, Megan. I just want to comment that the research could not have been done if 33 nurse coaches didn't volunteer their time. So I'm indebted to them. And you bring up what I wanted to say to Dottie, and that is the paternalistic approach that nurses administer in their care. You may not do that, and people here may not do that, but I see it every day. It's very paternalistic, and coaching is not that. And so it is different in that way. So thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. That was a wonderful presentation. Great work. Thank you.